My mom told me in front of my husband that she would prefer my ex. My husband went silent, and when I confronted her about it, she brushed it off, saying I was making a big deal out of nothing. Hello Reddit, I never thought I'd be the type to post something like this, but I really need to get it off my chest because it's been eating at me. My mom told me in front of my husband that she would prefer my ex. My husband went silent, and when I confronted her about it, she brushed it off, saying I was making a big deal out of nothing. I still can't believe it happened, and honestly, I'm struggling with how to process everything. Here's what went down. It started as a normal evening. My husband and I were invited over to my mom's house for dinner. Nothing fancy, just a typical family get-together. We've done this countless times before, and while my mom has always been a bit blunt, I never expected her to cross such a personal line. Dinner started off fine. We were chatting about work, some upcoming vacation plans, and random little things like TV shows we were watching. My mom seemed to be in a good mood, laughing and sharing stories. But then, out of nowhere, she steered the conversation into dangerous territory. She brought up my ex. Now, for some background, my ex and I dated for about 3 years before things ended. It wasn't some explosive breakup, but it was definitely the right decision. We just weren't compatible in the ways that mattered. He was charming, sure, but unreliable and emotionally distant when it counted. My mom, however, always liked him, probably more than she ever liked me, if I'm being honest. She saw him as this perfect, successful guy and ignored all the issues I dealt with in that relationship. So when she casually mentioned his name, I immediately felt my guard go up. I tried to steer the conversation away, but then she dropped the bomb. With a little smirk on her face and in the most nonchalant tone, she said, "You know, I still think ex's name was better for you." I froze. I could feel the blood rushing to my face, my stomach tightening. My husband was sitting right there, and she just said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. I glanced over at him, hoping he'd say something, maybe defend me, or even just call out how inappropriate her comment was. But he didn't. He went silent. He didn't even react visibly, no raised eyebrow, no awkward laugh, nothing. Just complete silence. I could feel the tension in the room thickening by the second, and all I could think was, did this really just happen? I tried to compose myself in the moment because I didn't want to cause a scene right there at the table. My mom just kept talking like nothing had happened, moving on to some story about her neighbor or something equally mundane. I could barely process what she was saying because her words were still ringing in my ears. I still think ex's name was better for you. I can't even explain how humiliating it felt. It wasn't just disrespectful, it felt like a betrayal from my own mother. And my husband's silence? That just made it worse. I wasn't expecting him to start a fight, but some acknowledgement, some show of support would have meant the world in that moment. The rest of dinner felt like I was trapped in some surreal nightmare. I was nodding along to whatever my mom was saying, but my mind was spinning. I kept replaying the moment over and over, wondering if I was overreacting or if it really was as bad as it felt. But deep down, I knew. It was that bad. By the time dinner wrapped up, I was emotionally drained. My husband and I thanked her for the meal and left, but the car ride home was silent. I was too upset to speak, and he seemed like he didn't know what to say. I could feel the tension between us growing, and I knew I couldn't let it sit. I had to confront both of them. My mom for saying something so hurtful, and my husband for not standing up for me. But honestly, I didn't know which conversation would be harder. The car ride home was suffocating. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is pressing down on you. I stared out the window, my mind racing, replaying my mom's words over and over. I still think ex's name was better for you. It echoed in my head like a broken record. But more than that, I kept thinking about my husband, his silence. I expected him to say something, anything, to break the tension. But he didn't. He just drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual, eyes fixed on the road ahead like it was the only thing that mattered. I kept sneaking glances at him, trying to read his expression, but it was blank. Completely unreadable. Was he angry? Hurt? Embarrassed? I couldn't tell. And the longer the silence stretched, the more frustrated I became. My emotions were all over the place. Anger at my mom for being so disrespectful, confusion about why my husband didn't speak up, and this gnawing feeling of being caught in the middle of it all, like I was the only one carrying the weight of what had happened. When we finally pulled into our driveway, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to him before he could even shut off the car. "Why didn't you say anything?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't help it. I'd been holding it in for too long. He sighed, finally leaning back in his seat and rubbing his face with his hands. "What do you want me to say?" he muttered, his voice low and tired. That answer hit me like another slap in the face. What do I want you to say? I wanted him to acknowledge how messed up that situation was. I wanted him to stand up for me, to have my back when my own mother disrespected both of us. I wanted him to feel as hurt and angry as I did. But instead, he just sat there like it didn't even matter. "I wanted you to say something," I shot back, my voice rising. "She basically said I should have married someone else, and you just sat there." He finally looked at me then, his eyes meeting mine, and I could see the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "I didn't want to start a fight at the dinner table," he said. "What good would that have done? You know how your mom is. She says stuff like that to get a reaction." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like he was minimizing what happened, like he didn't understand how deeply it hurt me. "So you just let her say whatever she wants? You didn't even look upset." Of course I was upset, he snapped, his voice finally rising. "But I'm not going to get into it with your mom in her house. That's not my place. Not his place." Those words echoed in my head. If standing up for me wasn't his place, then whose was it? I felt this overwhelming wave of disappointment wash over me. I wasn't asking for a shouting match or a dramatic scene. I just wanted to know that he had my back. We sat there in silence again, both of us stewing in our own frustration. I could feel the distance growing between us, like this wasn't just about what my mom said, but about something deeper. This wasn't the first time I'd felt like he avoided conflict, but this time it stung in a way I couldn't ignore. Eventually, he got out of the car and went inside, leaving me sitting there alone. I stared at the dashboard, trying to process everything. Was I overreacting? Was I expecting too much? Or was this silence a sign of something bigger, something I hadn't wanted to admit before? Later that night, when we were getting ready for bed, I tried to bring it up again, hoping we could talk it out calmly. But he was already shutting down, giving me those short, clipped answers that made it clear he didn't want to discuss it anymore. "I don't know what else you want me to say," he muttered as he climbed into bed. "I'm not going to argue with your mom. That's your fight, not mine." That sentence hit me harder than anything else that night. Your fight, not mine. I felt this cold knot form in my stomach. It wasn't just about what my mom said, it was about the fact that when things got tough, I felt like I was standing alone. And that realization hurt more than my mom's words ever could. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we got here. My mom's comment was cruel, yes, but it was my husband's reaction, or lack thereof, that left me feeling completely alone. I didn't just want him to defend me, I needed him to care enough to say something, to show that what she said was unacceptable. But he didn't. And that silence said more than words ever could. The next morning, I woke up with that same heavy feeling in my chest. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning all night, replaying the dinner, the car ride, the argument with my husband. But what weighed on me the most wasn't just the silence, it was the realization that I needed to confront my mom. I couldn't let her comment slide like it was nothing. I had to make her understand how hurtful it was. I texted her later that morning, trying to keep it calm and direct. "Hey, can we talk later? I need to clear the air about something from last night." She replied almost immediately with a cheerful, "Of course. Come by whenever." Like nothing had happened. That response alone irritated me, but I was determined to stay composed. When I arrived at her house, she greeted me with the same casual attitude, like everything was perfectly normal. We sat down in the kitchen, and I didn't waste any time. "Mom, what you said last night about X's name, that wasn't okay." My voice was steady, but I could feel the tension building inside me. She raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my directness. "Oh, that? You're still thinking about that. She waved her hand like it was nothing. I was just making a comment. You know I always liked him. That dismissive tone lit a fire inside me. It wasn't just a comment, Mom. You said it right in front of my husband. Do you know how disrespectful that was? To him, to me? It was completely out of line. She sighed, leaning back in her chair like I was overreacting. You're being too sensitive. I didn't mean anything by it. It's just my opinion. You don't have to take everything so personally. Too sensitive. That phrase hit a nerve. It was like she was trying to gaslight me into thinking I was the problem, that my feelings weren't valid. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. Mom, it's not about being sensitive. It's about respect. You don't have to like every decision I make, but you don't get to undermine my marriage. You crossed a line. She rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed now. Oh, please. I'm your mother. I can say what I want. Besides, X's name was better in my opinion. That doesn't mean I don't like your husband, but I'm allowed to have my preferences. That was it. The final straw. I realized in that moment that she wasn't going to apologize, wasn't going to acknowledge how hurtful her words were. She saw nothing wrong with what she said, and worse, she believed she was entitled to say it because she was my mother. You're allowed to have your opinions, Mom, I said, standing up, but I'm allowed to set boundaries. And I'm telling you now, if you can't respect my husband and my marriage, we're going to have a serious problem. She looked at me, genuinely surprised. Maybe she didn't think I had it in me to stand up to her. But I was done letting her belittle my choices and dismiss my feelings. Don't be dramatic, she scoffed, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. You'll get over it. I shook my head, grabbing my bag. No, Mom, I won't. Not this time. And with that, I left. When I got home, I sat down with my husband. I knew we still had unfinished business. His silence was still a wedge between us, and I couldn't just sweep it under the rug. I talked to my mom, I said quietly. He looked up from his phone, his face unreadable. How did it go? He asked, his tone cautious. About as well as I expected, I replied. She doesn't think she did anything wrong. He nodded, like that didn't surprise him. But I wasn't done. But that's not the only thing bothering me, I continued, my heart pounding in my chest. I need to know why you didn't say anything. Why you just sat there and let her disrespect us like that. He sighed, setting his phone down and finally giving me his full attention. I didn't know what to say, he admitted. I didn't want to make things worse. I thought staying quiet was the best way to keep the peace. But it didn't keep the peace, I shot back. It made me feel alone. Like you didn't have my back. His face softened, and for the first time since that dinner, I saw the guilt in his eyes. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I should have said something. I just /you 2026, I didn't want to start a fight, but I see now that staying silent hurt you more. That was all I needed to hear. An acknowledgement. A simple I'm sorry that made me feel like I wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. We talked for a long time after that, about how we could support each other better, about setting boundaries with my mom, and about not letting her comments come between us. In the end, confronting my mom and having that tough conversation with my husband was one of the hardest things I've ever done. But it taught me something important. Standing up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, is necessary. And sometimes, the people who hurt us the most are the ones who think they have the right to because of who they are in our lives. But respect isn't optional, not from a parent, not from a partner. And if someone can't give you that, it's okay to set boundaries and protect your peace.